Alright, in this video I want to talk about adding custom control attributes to your control object, or custom attributes to control objects. So when I have a control object like this one, it could be the hips override or the head control or whatever it is, I want to add more channels into the channel box than already exists, so I can make custom channels. And those values can drive other things. So for instance, I want to add a control that controls the curvature attribute of my bendable antenna here. So one thing I need to know is the actual beginning and end point of my antenna. Now I always want to give myself a lot of extra space, so I'm just going to jot this down as a value of its highest value and its lowest value, so that I have an idea when I create this. So I'm going to go a little farther than I want to, so I'm going to say a value of negative 170, and probably positive 170. So I'll just make it negative 170, positive 170. And then my middle would be 0. So my curvature of 0 would be a midpoint. So let's say if I wanted to add that as a control custom attribute to this particular object. So what I want to do is I want to go into first I want to modify something. I want to modify it, and I want to go into add attribute. So I can select the object. I'm going to go down to add attribute, and I'm going to give it a name. Long name. This is going to be left antenna bend. So LFT antenna bend. And it is going to be keyable. It's going to be a float because it's going to have decimal place in it. I can have small values or high values. The minimum value is going to be negative 170. The maximum value is going to be 170. And the default is going to be 0. Now when I say add, notice that it adds that here in my timeline. Now if I was to select that and middle mouse, you'll notice that it's changing values, and it'll go all the way up to 170 and all the way down to negative 170. I'm going to add another one. I'm going to call it right antenna bend. I'm going to do the same thing. A minimum value of negative 170. Maximum value of 170, default 0, and it's a float attribute. And I'm going to say add. So now I have right antenna bend and left antenna bend. And I'm going to add two more, a rotate attribute. So I'm going to left antenna rotate, right antenna rotate. So I'm going to say left antenna rotate. And I'm going to have a minimum. I'm just basically going to make it so they can rotate 360 degrees. So my minimum value is going to be negative 360. My maximum value is going to be 360, and a default of 0. I'm going to add that, and I'm going to add my right antenna rotate, and same thing, minimum negative 360, maximum 360, default 0. It's a float attribute. Alright, left antenna, right antenna, left antenna, right antenna. That's adding the attributes here. I've added these values, and so now what I need to do is actually make a connection to the actual bend attribute on the from the control object onto this. So what I have to do is I have to go into my Windows and in my connection editor, under General Editors, Connection Editor. And what I have to do is I have to load the controlling object here. I'm going to load that on my left-hand side. By default, it was already up. And if I go down through all this, I can get down and I can see these actual named channels that I have just created. Now, I need to go into my object here, I'm going to select my antenna. I'm going to go down into the bend attribute, and I'm going to go down into this area, and I'm going to select curvature, and I'm going to load that over here. And I've got to find that right there, curvature. So my left antenna is selected, my curvature attribute is selected. It's saying that in the control in the channels for the HIPS override, there is a left antenna channel, and it's going to control the curvature value of the bend deformer of that particular object. So let's see if that works. If it doesn't, then I got to fix it. So here's my left antenna bend, and I'm bending that, and it is working. And I want to do the right antenna, or my left antenna rotate value. So I need to go back to here, and I'm going to rotate I'm going to choose the rotation attribute, so I'm going to actually load that, and I'm going to go down to the controls, and they're usually kind of hidden. So rotate, I'm going to twirl this down to my rotate Y. Left antenna bend, left antenna rotate will control the rotate Y attribute. So if I go back to here and I go down to my left antenna rotate and I rotate it, then I can see that I've changed the angle to which that antenna is moving. So that gives me the ability to bend my antenna back and forth like I want, which I actually really think is kind of funny. And then I can rotate my antenna. Alright, let's do the same thing for the other side. So my object is already loaded, and I'm going to go to my right antenna bend. I got to choose my object. I'm going to go down into the bend attribute, choose curvature, load that, and go find the curvature attribute right there. So right antenna bend, curvature. I can test that out real quick. I always kind of like to test it out. Right antenna bend. I can see that bending. And I'm going to go and choose my antenna. I need to choose my actual antenna here, the bend attribute. I'm going to choose that. And it's the rotate Y attribute of my bend antenna that I want to find, and I'm going to go down and find that here, rotate Y. So my right antenna, rotate Y. I can choose my control object. If I go down to my right antenna, rotate, if I did it right, I can rotate my antenna there. And that is adding a custom control to my character. Alright, so that was fairly straightforward. Choosing the control object that you want, adding the attribute that you want to it first, know your values beforehand so that you can input that, your high and your low values, then set and make the connections. Connect it, whatever the attribute is, to the actual thing that it's controlling. Alright, I hope you found that to be fairly straightforward.